Hello, my name is Rachel Baroni and I'm Curriculum Leader for English. I'm here to talk to you about the Year 11 curriculum for English, the GCSE exams for this year, and to suggest some ways that you might support your children with their revision. As I go through my presentation, I'm also going to address three commonly held myths or misconceptions that students sometimes express about their approach to English revision and hopefully suggest some ways around that. So I'm going to share my screen with you now and hopefully you'll be able to see my slides. So the first thing to say about English is that students will get two GCSEs out of their English study, which is GCSE English Language and GCSE English Literature. They're two completely separate GCSEs and they will be awarded two separate grades at the end. So I'm going to start by dealing with GCSE English Language first. So on that slide, what you can see is an overview of the GCSE English Language qualification. And the first thing to mention is that Ofqual have confirmed that there will be no changes to the GCSE English Language exam this year. So if you've got children that have been through this process already in the last sort of 3 or 4 years, then the process is unchanged and the exam will follow exactly the same format. So what you can see there is two exam papers, paper 1 and paper 2. They're very consistent, so there's lots of, they sort of mirror each other in structure. There's a reading section and a writing section on both paper. They're assessed in very similar ways, so they're both 1 hour and 45 minutes long, and they're equally weighted, so they're worth 50% of the qualification. Paper 1 is the fiction paper, and paper 2 is a non-fiction paper. I'll talk a little bit more about the differences in a moment. So that brings me to myth number 1. So sometimes students seem to hold this belief that you can't revise for English language, or perhaps more accurately, they're not quite sure how to revise for English language. So if I take you through the structure of the paper, and I'll talk to you a little bit about how students need to prepare for the paper. So what you see there is an overview of paper 1 and paper 2. So paper 1 was that fiction paper, Explorations in Creative Reading and Writing. And it's divided into two reading and writing sections. So the thing to note about this is that the questions are always the same. So year on year, they all have the same sentence stem. The questions are the same. What changes is the text. So every year you'll be given an unseen text and you'll be asked to apply your knowledge to that text. And that's the bit that we can't revise for. That's the bit that you have to do on the spot. And it's a real test of your reading and writing skills. So the bit that you can revise for is the questions, understanding what the questions are, what the questions are asking you, and really understanding what the mark scheme looks like and how to move from one band on the mark scheme to the next band up, which is really what drives students' improvement. So question 1 is always about listing 4 things. The questions are structured a little bit like a ladder on this paper. They get a little bit harder as you go on, and they're more heavily weighted as you go through as well. So that creates timing issues for students as well, because the biggest questions, the questions which are worth the most marks, are towards the end of the paper when students tend to be getting tired and time might be running out. So yes, question 1 is list 4 things. Question 2 is about analysing language. Question 3 is analysing the writer's use of structure. Question 4 is an evaluative question where students are provided with a statement and they have to explain to what extent they agree with that statement. And then section B is a writing section. And then if we move to paper 2, it's the same again, 4 reading questions followed by a writing question. And again, the questions don't change year on year, the stems are always the same. So question 1 is a true or false statement. So from a bank of 8 statements, you have to identify the 4 which are true. Again, it's like a ladder. So question 1 is really just testing whether the children have understood the paper, can they identify the correct information? And then it starts to get a little bit more difficult. So question 2 is about writing a summary. Question 3 is about how does the writer use language, which is essentially the same question as you see on paper 1 on question 2. How does the writer use language? Question 4 is a comparison of different perspectives, the writer's perspectives and viewpoints. And then in section B, the student then themselves become the writer and they write a piece about from their own perspective and giving their own viewpoint. The slight added difficulty with paper 2 is that you're dealing with 2 texts rather than just the one. So there's that comparative element in there and timing issues around the reading and things like that. So yeah, you can't revise for the unseen text, because you'll never know what they're going to be until you get into the exam. But the bit you can revise for, and students absolutely must revise, is understanding the questions, understanding the mark scheme, understanding the skills that are being tested, and how to develop those skills. And that's a process that we're starting at the moment, and that will run through as we move through the mock exams. So if I switch attention to GCSE English Literature, here there is a change. So Ofqual have confirmed that there should be a change, and they've taken out some of the content because of the effects of lockdown. So particularly with literature, with some of those longer texts, they're very worried that students really haven't had the time to explore those in enough depth. And by taking some of the content out, it allows us as teachers to concentrate on fewer texts and perhaps find sort of, deeper level of knowledge. So there's a little bit less information about these papers. It hasn't been confirmed just yet about how long they're going to be or exactly what the weighting is going to be. But this is the information we have so far. So paper 1 will be 2 questions. Section A will be a question on the poetry of power and conflict, and section B will be a question on Inspector Calls. Paper 2 will be, section A will be Romeo and Juliet, and section B will be unseen poetry, which is an unseen poem on its own to start with, and then part 2 is a comparison to a second unseen poem. So lots of content still in there, but a little bit lighter than it would have been had the changes not been made. So that brings me on to student myth number 2. So sometimes students hold this belief that they are somehow better at English language than they are at English literature. I think sometimes the difficulty level of Shakespeare can be a little bit off-putting, and when students talk about the poetry, they sometimes feel a bit sort of overfaced, overwhelmed by the fact that there are 15 separate poems that they need to look at. What I would say is that statistically speaking, they're likely to do very well in English literature. Our results are actually very slightly stronger for English literature than they are for English language. The results for language are very good, but what students don't always see is just how strong they are. I think they have sometimes a little bit of a confidence gap between language and literature. So it's really worth encouraging students to kind of stick with the literature, keep working at it, because the chances are they're going to come away with a very strong grade, as good or possibly statistically even slightly better than their grade in English language. So these are the key dates as we look to the year ahead. In November, there'll be a series of mock exams. We'll do English language paper 1 and paper 2. We're going to do not quite a proper paper as such. We'd like to test students' understanding of Romeo and Juliet and of the poetry, because those are the 2 units we've really been studying. So we're going to have a paper, a sort of a combined paper there, where we're taking a question from each paper and giving them those as practice questions. So that was what will happen in November. Then we spend a really intense period from sort of January, February, really working on English language. So that's when we'll take those mock exams that they did in November. We will reflect upon them. We will do lots of extra work. We'll do lots of practice papers, lots of practice questions, and then they'll have another go in March. It says March, actually it's February. At the end of February, they'll come back and do those language paper 1 and paper 2 again, and then they'll have a go at English literature paper 1. So they'll have another go at doing the Inspector Calls and the poetry. So by the time they get to doing their actual GCSEs, they'll have had lots of practice. I guess one of the concerns from last year, from my perspective, is that they will have missed doing the Year 10 exams. So the Year 10 exam would have been English language paper 1, and it would have been English literature paper 2. So because they haven't done that particular exam, it means that they've missed out on some of that feedback and some of that exam practice. So we will try to put as much of that back in as we can. That's the one big gap that I feel is missing from last year. I think the other content we can cover, we can revise, and it helps that some of the content has been taken out for literature, so we're not in a particularly bad place in terms of the content of the curriculum, but they are a little bit less experienced with exams than ideally they would be at this point in the year. So these assessments will be important. In terms of the GCSE exams, you've probably already heard that the exams are going to take place 3 weeks later than usual, but there is a bit of a caveat around that. So one of the GCSE English language papers will be before the summer half term. That'll be quite early, so that students will, if there's any sort of anyone being affected by COVID, they're less likely to be affected on both papers. So that's one to bear in mind, that one of the English language papers is likely to come first. We haven't had it confirmed which one. I'm assuming paper 1, but it hasn't been confirmed yet. But one of them is likely to be significantly earlier than the other exams. So how have we organised the curriculum so that students can manage all this work? Well, it's delivered through 3 different strands. We've got the English lessons themselves, we've got homework tasks, and then we've got a revision programme. And each strand is carefully designed to enable students to cover and to revisit the content of both of the GCSEs. So the lesson focus will always be, the main focus of what they're doing. That's 50 minutes of work out of the full hour. And all of that is where the teacher is really guiding them through those units of work with lots of different tasks, lots of practice questions, looking at model answers, lots of shared work, lots of discussion, shared planning, and really developing students' own confidence and independence. The homework focus is always different from the lesson focus in order to keep that prior learning live and keep the revision going. So for example, at the moment, we've been teaching Romeo and Juliet in the lessons, but the homework tasks have been poetry. So the homework tasks are set through a homework booklet or via class charts, and students can do that either electronically or on the hard copy, and that work will take up to an hour. We then use our starter activities, so every lesson there'll be up to 10 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes, where we are also testing that poetry knowledge as well. So we can check how well students are retaining and memorising those key facts. So that helps us to kind of keep something the main focus and then have something sort of in the background where we're still working on it, we're still making progress. That's been tremendously useful this half term in particular. Students have made great progress with Romeo and Juliet, but they've also been able to retrieve their knowledge around the poetry as well, which has been really helpful. The final strand is revision. Now this is much more independent. Now there is a revision programme which I'll go through in a little bit more detail in a moment. I would recommend that students need to start independently spending up to an hour a week independently revising English. Now that could include coming to a revision session, revision session after school. If they're not able to do that, there are also revision materials on the VLE, which I'll share with you in a moment. So there are 8 sort of components, different components of the exams for them to prepare for. Some of those we can some of us we can cover in lessons. Some they will need to do independently. So this just as an example, this is November's calendar. I will upload this to the website and share this so you can have a copy of the calendar. If you look at November, when we come back after half term, you can see here we're going to be focusing on English language paper 2, section A, and then section B. So that's 3 weeks of work. As homework and starters, we'll still be practicing the poetry. So week 8, week 9, and week 10 of practicing the poetry. In terms of revision then, what students should be doing in their own time is practicing English language paper 1. We are unlikely to be able to spend much time revising English language paper 1 in lessons. So that's something that students are really going to have to undertake independently. We'll also be starting revision sessions to support that. I'll give you some more details in a second. So that brings me to the third and final myth, which is this idea that sometimes students seem to think that by year 11, the sort of fatalistic attitude that maybe it's too late. And that's very, very far from being the case. And this year, more than any other year, I would argue. In actual fact, year 11 is when that progress really happens for most students. And they make significant progress from their mock exams. As long as they keep revising, coming to the revision classes, keeping that knowledge live, they will progress. Most year 11 students, that average progression is about 1 number grade between their mock exams and their real exams. So practice really does make perfect. I would caution students to say that actually the average is 1 number grade. If they need more than that, so if they get their mock exams and actually they're more than 1 grade below where they need to be, you can still progress at a faster rate, but it is going to take real independent revision, real focus, and really sort of accelerating that progress. So like I said before, they really need to practice the questions because they're always the same, and the examiners are going to expect a really high level of knowledge about each one. They really need to understand the skills in each question. I would recommend they practice the exam technique in a really focused way, concentrate on one question at a time. So you sit down, I'm doing question 2 tonight, I'm going to spend, 40 minutes, writing my best answer ever, and I'm only going to do that particular question. I'm not going to think about anything else. Look at the mark scheme so they really understand what the examiner's looking for. Reread the exemplar work. There's lots of model answers we have now so that students can become really well acquainted with what a good answer looks like. So we've got record scripts, the textbook has examples in it, and the mark scheme now has model answers in it as well. So students can get really familiar with what good answers look like. And that's a really important process. And then the next step of that is to start timing themselves, because actually one of the difficulties in the exam isn't just about knowledge, isn't just about reacting to this unseen text, but it's about doing that in the time allowed. And it's designed to put students under pressure. So timing themselves might be the next step. So can they do it, first of all, can they do it without any time pressure? And then second of all, can they do it under time pressure, excuse me. And then once we get into after the mock exams, then they'll have a tracking sheet and they'll be able to gauge question by question how well they're progressing and how close they're getting to their target grade. So lots of approaches. So there are lots and lots of creative ways that students kind of revise, lots of mind maps, bullet points, flow diagrams, learning key quotations, flashcards, things like that. In terms of what help is available, so we're going to start revision sessions after school. So I'm reading from the second bullet point there instead of the first. Revision sessions are going to start on Wednesday, November the 4th. We're going to be in G2 and we're going to run from 3:30 to 4:15. And we'll be following that revision programme question by question. There are also, I'll go back up to the first bullet point now, there are also revision resources on the school VLE. Now, if you go onto the VLE following the link on my PowerPoint, you'll find in there 2 folders, one for language, one for literature. And in each section, there are units for every single text and for every single section of the exam. And they're organised, the resources are organised by priority areas. So they're labelled study, revise or practice. So what students will need to do is think, what do I need to do with this text? Do I need to study it? So is my knowledge of Romeo and Juliet secure? If it isn't fully secure and I don't feel like I know the text well enough, or there are particular acts or scenes that I don't really know, then I should probably look in the study folder. And in there are lots of resources which are revision workbooks. There are notes on particular scenes, and that will help them to understand the text a bit better. If they feel like they understand the text and actually what they want to do is to start doing some revision, perhaps doing something a little bit more thoughtful with that knowledge rather than just learning, but actually sort of starting to analyse and start to make some comments, then they would go to the revise folder, which sort of takes things up a little bit more. And then the last folder is called practice, and that's where they will find all of the past exam questions which they can have a go at. There are mark schemes in there as well, and some model answers as well. So that's where they're kind of not just developing their knowledge about the text, but they're actually starting to use that knowledge to prepare practice answers. And of course, anything they do, they're more than welcome to bring in and give to their teachers, and their teachers will have a look at them for them and give them some feedback. So there's plenty in there to do, and there shouldn't be any time when any student in year 11 says, I don't know what to do, or I don't have anything to do for English, because everything is there. And then the last sort of strand of the help is targeted intervention. So if your child really is struggling, or they do their mock exams and there's some unexpected weakness there, we will start to pick those students up. So students where they're really starting to struggle, their teachers will pick them up, they will spend time with them, they will give them specific feedback on those particular questions that they may have had trouble with. And we also have intervention groups as well, so small groups of students who might have working at a similar level or have a similar issue with a particular question, and those small groups will work together and try and make some headway on that. So year 11 absolutely is our priority. We are working incredibly hard to try and support them to close those gaps, any sort of areas of weakness that remain still from lockdown. We are trying to address those and also prepare them for the exams which are coming. So lots and lots of support and help is available. Lots of ways that you can help from home as well. Discussing the text and the tasks with your child. There are revision guides available which are really helpful, and there are useful websites which they can access more information. The big thing that students often express worries about is how they can learn quotations, so particularly for literature, how do they remember the quotations? I think it's probably the poetry, if I'm honest, that creates the biggest anxiety about that. There are 15 separate poems, so learning the quotations for those poems can be a bit daunting. They don't need to learn them absolutely word for word and off by heart and learn the whole thing. It's, you know, the example is very clear. It's not a textbook as such that they have to learn word for word. And what's always more interesting is what they do with those quotations. But students like to know the quotations because then it gives them that confidence to know what they're going to say about the text. So there's some suggestions there about ways that students could learn those quotations. Generally speaking, Year 11 is a really successful year, and it's great to see how students develop across that time and over those months. I think that the change particularly from September to March is usually, you know, really huge for students. It's normally a massive step forward, and this year I think that will be even more the case. So look, thank you very much for your time. Please feel free to contact me if you have any further questions, or likewise to your child's English teacher, because I'll be very glad to hear from you. Thank you very much.